Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my God of War God Mode difficulty pain run. We're going to be going for no damage, and most of this level is pretty simple. Although we are escalating because we are, of course, in hell, Natalie. The Underworld, as it is known. And we're taking on some captains that have been transformed. You'll notice a common theme here. Enemies you fought before with interesting finishes on them now. And they look really sick. I definitely cannot say anything other than that. I really like the fire motif here. I'm not too sure if it changes the enemies too much. I didn't really notice. But it doesn't matter, does it? It's enough to make it seem like they're different. Which I always think that's an interesting part of video games, isn't it? Do you think a palette swap is good enough? Do you think a redesign with an existing moveset is good enough? Or do you think that if it looks different, it should indeed be different? Because I can see the arguments for both. And I feel like if you do one of those things, I'm okay with it. You know, give them a fancy hat, give them slightly different shoes, maybe give them a cape. I'll kill them, and I'll feel like I killed something new. But there's a lot of navigational hazards in this level. And as long as you're not, you know, being silly, you should get past them with no problems. And then when you do get to the fights, it tends to be just archers and harpies and some captains. Later on, there's going to be some interesting minotaurs on a fight that's got quite a fun sequence going on. And then it's going to be Satyr City, which is easily one of the hardest parts of the whole run. I don't think it's hard for a good reason. I think it's hard because the Satyr seems like he wasn't really designed to be put with anything else. He's the guy who hogs the ball pool, you know? He's the dude that wants everything. All the toys are his, you can't touch them. And if you try, he comes and gives you a big old smack in the mouth. And of course, they put two of them together. And sometimes if you want to come up with an interesting problem for a player to face, that's exactly what you do. You put things together that you never anticipated would be together, and it turns it into something very problematic. And occasionally in some games it can be a little bit too much, but sometimes it just kind of works. You find a rhythm, you find a way, you make it work, you know? And I think some games do it a lot better than others. And I think some of the most difficult examples tend to be from games that aren't really... like, games you would expect to be absurd because they're already so difficult tend to be some of the more fairer challenges. Because if you think of something like Elden Ring, everybody's favourite video game, there's somebody called the Godskin Apostles. There's two of them. Apostle, Noble. And you fight them at the same time. And everybody likes to point at that fight as if it's like Ornstein and Smo on crack. And all the things that people say, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Ornstein and Smo is a very fair fight that's really well designed. It's got some problems and some nuance that you can struggle with, but for the most, it's pretty damn good. The Godskin Apostles, unless you use sleep, is designed to be just trash in so many ways. Movesets that should have never been together, movesets that don't sync up correctly, movesets that don't complement each other, and a whole host of other problems. Like, it's just a fucking bad fight, right? Even if you learn how to circumvent it, even if you learn how to manipulate it, destroy it, it's lame. And it's lame because they should have never put those guys together, but they did, and it comes across as really lazy. And then you have a fight like Nietzsche and Ishtaros in Ninja Gaiden. Two enemies that, on their own, are incredibly capable, incredibly dangerous bosses that will beat the shit out of you regardless of who you are. And then they put them together. And they put them together in the same room, and it's not a room that's sizable enough to just fuck off and run around for 200 years. Like, you are close, and they're there, and they're both doing stuff. That fight harbours from, like, this is actually kind of elegant, to, oh my god, how do you even get out of that? And you have to bust your ass off learning what to do in those situations, and then even then, when you know it to a really decent amount, and you've got answers for most of the problems, if they sync up in such a way, you're probably gonna get hit. It turns it into more of a case of hope they don't sync up than anything else. And that there is an example of one of the hardest ganks in the history of video games. That fight is phenomenally challenging. But it's... compared to something like the Godskins, you can see that it's that there's something to it there. There's design to it, you know. You can see the understanding of what they were thinking. You can see that those moves weren't just cranked for the sake of being cranked. They're just two very capable monsters being very capable together. And I think that that's such a good example of how you do it as opposed to how you don't. And there are many examples I can use where they get this fine line and they tread it very carefully. But one thing I do find quite interesting is I don't think you do that in God of War, do you? Other than, you know, like the clones and some instances where there's some ads with some bosses. You don't really fight two bosses at the same time in my memory. And I could just be forgetting something really obvious, guys, so please remind me in the comments. And I find it interesting that this game is so well designed in so many ways. Like, you could call this the equivalent, because you're fighting two boss-type enemies, because these enemies are absolute bosses. They probably run a factory somewhere or a sweatshop, and they're just tapping a clipboard and being like, "Oi, cunt, sew those sneakers quicker." But you might not have been able to see what I did there. The start of this encounter is really important, and you might be wondering, well, where's the other guy gone? I put him behind the chest, and now he can't get here. Only he can. Because after so often, he finds a way out. But usually, if you stick him behind the chest and you come down to this lip here and you keep him off camera as best as you can grab this guy for free. And this just turns into mashing circle until your arm falls off. And if they both get unleashed, then it gets scary and you have to reposition him. But if you can get him stuck here, you can just destroy the spawns and then go and destroy him. And it turns this into a kind of a needless endeavour. But there's no discounting how tough this is. Two satyrs at the same time is almost a bridge too far, unless you really know the enemy, and even then, it's troublesome. So, do what you can to win, do what you can to survive, and we're just going to talk for a moment here about the idea of, I wonder why God of War didn't do two proper bosses at the same time. Because there's plenty of mythology where there's like more than one character associated. And I suppose you could technically say, is it Castor and Pollux from Ascension? They were two people, but they were one guy, weren't they? And, you know, if you want to be really pedantic, you could mention him. But the idea of two separate threats attacking you at the same time, this game kind of, it relayed that into Cyclopses and into Satyrs, you know? It did it into these other areas. And I think there's an elegance to that, and I think there's a discipline to it as well. Because God of War knew when to go big, and it knew when to go small. It knew when to focus something, and it knew when to pull the camera back. And I think that's one of its greatest strengths. Games now strike me as people decide to do things just because they can, not because they should. And I don't think they ever stop to think, is this helping? Is this making something better? Does this add? And it goes back to the idea of anybody can make a shit difficulty, but can you make a challenging difficulty fun? Probably not, because it's so tough. And sadly, most people don't really know what makes a video game tough, because they don't play it enough, and they don't apply themselves in that way, because they're not interested. And that's fine, you know, not everybody's going to care. But that's the reason why, for instance, if you don't have any interest in engineering, you're not one of the engineers designing Formula 1 cars. The people doing that have a passion for engineering, have a passion for making vehicles move quickly, and potentially love Formula 1 and want to drive that sport to the next logical evolution to keep it competitive and keep it fair and keep it safe and keep it awesome. Not everyone's going to be a Formula 1 engineer, designer person, you know? Like, it's not for everyone. But that doesn't mean that that's not a really valued job and a really valuable area of expertise. And I would compare that here, which is this notion of the people making difficulty now are the people that grew up without difficult games. So they've skewed and bastardized their own definitions of what difficulty is. And instead we get this really strange kind of biased difficulty that's then confirmed through other sources and agreed upon by other people that know less than they do. And then you get this weird idea that something hard is two bosses in a row and no checkpoint. You get this idea that something hard is dying to a boss and having to run fucking 2 minutes to get back to the door where he is. Like, we've got this weird notion now of what real challenge is. When this fight right here, guys, Even getting that fucking satyr behind that chest is hard to do. It's a pain in the ass. It took me a while to be able to put him there. Because this game is hard to play, and it's very demanding, and it's very difficult. And on the emulator, it feels at times like really weird shit's happening, and it might not be, it might just be the game, but you know, you'll have to leave a comment if you see any weird shit. But there's a very good reason, guys, why I've segmented this no damage run. Because if I didn't, I'd have been here for the rest of the fucking year, and I'd have got really, really salty and annoyed with it, and I might not have even been able to do it. There's always the chance of that. And it's because this is a really challenging game. And it's funny because in the kind of elitist circles of action games, this is the game that they point at as the easy, accessible, cheesy one. Yet it can be so punishing. And now we're at a point in games where we don't really know what punishing is, because no one can remember. And the people who do know don't really engage with modern games, because modern games are so easy now, they play their fucking selves. And it's this strange thing, isn't it? Like, how can we ever evolve difficulty and push it into a meaningful, well-constructed, nuanced and creative direction if all the people that truly understand it don't give a shit about new games? It's so weird. And I do think that you can't just design things around the high end, around the top 1%. I think that's silly, because then you make a game no one can play. Then you make a game that's only fun for a small percentage of people, and that's just masochism and it's empty. I do think you need players of all levels engaging with the system to show you what it looks like, and to show you how fun it is to play. I think that's so essential. Because you can learn a lot from an inexperienced player. You can learn a lot from a master. And you see the problem that some masters have, or some of the greater players, is they can't remember when they were bad. They can't remember what it was like to suck, to not understand, to not have everything come so easily. So sometimes the people who play the best can be the worst teachers. They can be the worst advice givers, because they just go, oh, it's easy, do this. And you try it and you can't do it, and it's not so easy for you. So it puts you in this really interesting position of, you need people across a wide spectrum of ability and understanding to all cook the cake, so that when the cake comes out the other side, it's not just highly selective for these one type of people, and you've got something for everyone. And I think the objectivity there can be really difficult for people, because nobody wants to consider that they're the person that doesn't know much, or that they're the person that needs to learn more, or they're the person who's wrong. You know what the internet's like with being wrong. Like, if you're a human being, you're wrong a lot. It happens all the time. It's just part of life. That's what you learn. That's how you learn. But on the internet, you're held by any opinion you had 10 years ago, and you can never change it, and you're always fucking wrong, and I'm right, and here's why. So it just turns it into this weird kind of proud you versus them nonsense, and you lose the whole concept of what the conversation was. Because people prefer to attack people rather than ideas, and it's the ideas you want to have an issue with. It's fun to attack people in a joking sense, but when people take it too far, everyone just gets really offended and defensive, and when you're being defensive, you can't really truly have a critical discussion, because no discourse can happen. You're too busy like, I fucked your mum, and no one needs that, because, she's an old lady, she's tired, she wants rest. But you need to understand that there's more to this than you think. And that's the same for me, that's the same for you, that's the same for anyone. And at the same time, I think it's really nice to look at it from the perspective of, it doesn't always have to be hard. This is something that I bump into all the time. I've just played a game called Lies of P, and there's a boss in that game that has a very specific weakness, and it's almost a gimmick with how good it is at killing him, but if you do anything else, he's really resilient and quite a difficult boss for people. And I love the idea that he has this glaring weakness that makes him almost a skippable fight. I think that that's a really cool idea, and I think they could have done that a bit more. Because it makes me think of something like Yhorm from Dark Souls 3. Yhorm is a character who exists so that people can go, oh look, it's a Demon Souls reference. Because that's cool now, right? Referencing like that. But it turns out that you don't have to even engage with that system in that game, and if you fight that monster normally, which you can do, it just seems like a bad idea because he's very resilient, there's a really interesting moveset and a really good fight there. But you don't have to do it. And that, to me, is the design I love the most. If you want, you can choose a much more difficult path, and it will lead to a much more interesting encounter. Or you can hit him with the sword that fires the fucking horizon at people and kill him really quickly and turn it into essentially a Mario boss. And I'm not asking every boss, you hit with the sword 3 times and it dies. I'm just saying the idea that one player can come in and have a vastly different experience from another player, and it doesn't involve simply limiting what you do to your character / build / systems in the game, I think is a very healthy direction for games to take. Because I'm of the belief that no game is truly easy, because if it's easy, make it harder, This is something that a lot of us have done for a long time. You can look back all the way to the origins of gaming. There's always going to be somebody doing something to a game they love that makes it harder. When people say the game's too easy, they're generally very entry-level players who've beaten it once and didn't even do it in a very convincing manner, but just because they beat it makes them think they conquered it. It's the neophyte that believes themselves to be the Grandmaster. And it's a dangerous mentality because you go through your life being a master of absolutely fuck all, and all you really are is a fuckwit. And thankfully, it's a video game, so it doesn't really matter. But when you finally have your comeuppance, which is going to happen if you run your mouth particularly, you might bump into somebody and be like, oh, I'm great at Street Fighter, yeah, I know all the combos, dude, I can play any character, and you don't even know what a hit confirm is and you never block. You've never even heard the term, like, it's not your turn. You're gonna get destroyed by an entry-level player that understands basic fundamentals. It happens all the time. It happens in rhythm games, it happens in every game. These players have no concept or frame of reference of just how high the mountain goes. And they don't realise there's 9 mountains behind the mountain that they're looking at. And they believe that they're the peak, they're the apex, they're the polar bear that's like, well, nobody eats me, I eat everything. And then we go, oi dickhead, get in the fucking zoo. In that position, all you do is harm yourself when you think that you're it, that you're the shit, that you're the big dick. There's nothing wrong with confidence, there's nothing wrong with arrogance if it's used in the right dosage, especially if you know your own abilities. But if you don't, and you're mistaken, then all that's going to do is damage your development, and all that's going to do is damage video games. And I talk about examples all the time on this channel, you've heard them several times before. When we've discussed developers' problems with their games, literal, tangible, reality-based problems with their games, and because of the defensive nature to protect your own work, instead of going, yeah, that's an issue, that needs to be addressed, they've said that's working by design, which I really love. I love the idea of a developer owning up to bad design and thinking that it somehow empowers their argument because they themselves believe it to be good design. And a great example of this is in Uncharted. Is it Uncharted? I can't remember which Uncharted it is, guys. I do apologise. I think it might be Uncharted 2 or maybe Uncharted 1, but there's a Jeep section, and if you play it on Brutal, you can die before the screen fades in, and you even have control. And because you're on a mounted gun, you can't hide, you can't take cover, there's no defensive option available to you, so you just have to clench your ass and hope you don't die. And you have to kill things really fast and pray they don't shoot you first, and when you're playing on a difficulty where everything's really cranked, it happens super quick. There's a problem there in that, if you ask me. That is something that's not working. But that developer thinks it is. And I didn't have this conversation, it was a friend that had this conversation and I read it later. But to me, if that was my game, and somebody sent me that tweet and showed me that, I would have been so annoyed. And not, because they had to suffer and because it wasted their time and everything. I would be so annoyed that I'd missed it. Because if it was my game, I wouldn't have missed it. I tell you that, I would not have missed it. But this is the reality of video games, guys. Video games are being made by people who don't play them. They're being made by people, if they do play them, they don't play them very well. And a lot of the times, it seems now, they're made by people who don't understand them and don't really like them. And I think that's such a dangerous direction for this industry to go. Because our AAA now, they're factories trying to farm eager consumers with microtransactions. and exploitable human psychology. Whereas when God of War 1 came out, this was AAA. And this is a goddamn video game, and it's a really good one.